The Kings pick up their first win of the season against the Portland Trail Blazers. The beam is finally lit again after going 0-5 in the preseason and then, starting the season 0-2. Obviously, preseason doesn't really matter, but still a while between wins. And the Kings just came out and they did exactly what they needed to do against this Trailblazers team. After the first two games of the season, I thought things were going well. They were just some unfortunate losses, but the process was good and there were only a few things that they needed to straighten out. And now I can really look back on that and be like, we can appreciate those first two games for the positive things that they were because we got this win. If you lose then against the Trailblazers, then all of those positive things that you did in the first two games don't really matter as much because you weren't able to win against a bottom feeder team at home who's on the second night of a back-to-back. If you don't win against the Trailblazers, all of a sudden those first two losses look worse. But because they did, because they took care of business, because they continue to look good, we can continue to be excited about this team. And this was not a pretty game in the first half. I mean, this was an awful game in the first half. The officiating was horrible. They're supposed to be letting more contact go, but I feel like they called some things early that they probably shouldn't have, and then they kind of had to keep doing that to be consistent. And then there was the Malik Monk call that they then overturned after Mike Brown challenged. I don't know how you overturn that. And then it felt like after that call, then they started to like loosen up a little bit and let some things go. It's like that challenge forced them to look at what they were doing and be like, okay, this by the letter of the law and by how they were officiating the game, it should have been a foul, but by how they're supposed to be officiating games this season, it's like one of those plays where you play on. I feel like they realized that, and that kind of reset the officiating, and so it was better in the second half. But the Kings just had to win ugly in the first half. And the one thing that I would love to take the Kings roster from last season, put them into this game and see what happens in that first half, because I have a sneaking suspicion it would have been really bad, because it was DeMar DeRozan that kept us in this game and kept us in the lead in the first half by him just getting to the free throw line. He got to the free throw line 10 times in the first half, went 9 for 10 from the line, had 19 points in the first half. Other guys got to the line as well. Fox, Sabonis, Monk all got to the free throw line as well. All of them knocking down their free throws. The Kings shot 92% from the free throw line, continuing a very good trend to start this season. And the Kings also played well defensively. I mean, it was just such a slow game, free throws on both sides. The Kings started the game off by getting a whole bunch of stops, and that's never been an issue. The Kings starting unit defensively has never been an issue. As much as people, want Keon to start for defense, the defense in the starting unit with Kevin Huerter has never been an issue. It's when those bench guys come in. And so they were able to get stops. When the bench came in, they dropped off a little bit. It let Portland back into the game a little bit. I said, previewing this game after the last game, that I thought Keon Ellis would get minutes because of the way the Trailblazers roster is, where they have Scoot Henderson and they have Anthony Simons, and they can have them both on the court at the same time. And that's exactly what happened. When Scoot Henderson came in and Simons was still in the game, they were going to target Kevin Huerter, and so the Kings respond with Keon Ellis. So they have Fox and Ellis out there at the same time to be able to deal with the two quicker guards. Although I will say, when Kevin Huerter was matched up on Anthony Simons, he did really well. On the offensive side of the ball, the Kings they couldn't get any flow in the first half. I think they were really bothered by the Trailblazers' length. They couldn't get any good shots from the three-point line. It wasn't one of those games where they were just missing from the three-point line. They actually couldn't generate the shots. Whenever the Kings got into the lane, it was just a whole bunch of hands everywhere, and it was disrupting the Kings. And they didn't turn the ball over as much as I felt like they probably should have. There were definitely some times where the ball was loose and the Kings were able to recover it. Early on, the Kings tried to target Anthony Simons by having Kevin Huerter set that inverted pick for Domantas Sabonis to get Sabonis going downhill. And I liked that, but then I thought there were just too many possessions at the start of the game where the ball wasn't touching Fox and DeMar's hands. I think we've come to expect the first plays of the game to be drawn up with Kevin Huerter or Keegan Murray heavily involved. But then once you get past that first, second, maybe third possession, you got to get DeMar and Fox involved. And so I feel like the Kings kind of wasted the early good start defensively where the Trailblazers were missing some outside shots and they weren't able to extend that lead because they weren't going to Fox and DeMar enough early on. But eventually DeMar did get involved and Fox did get involved. And DeMar did a really good job of being involved throughout the first half. I thought Fox, there were times where he probably should have been involved a little bit more. There were times where he was maybe a little bit loose with his dribble, or times when he wasn't taking it upon himself and he was just swinging the ball to, a Kevin Huerter or a Keon Ellis when it's like, okay, it's later in the possession. You probably need to take it upon yourself a little bit. So there were a few times where I felt like Fox probably should have been more involved. But one thing the Kings did well was use him off the ball, especially in the corner, and have him running off screens to get to the middle of the court and to get to his left hand. He was starting in the right corner, getting to his left hand, and we saw him get 2 floaters to go, which was really encouraging to see because that's the part of his game that's been lacking to start this season and even last season was the floater, the mid-ranger. And he was able to go 7 for 12 from inside the arc this game, and that was super encouraging for him. At times, the Kings kind of struggled with the Trailblazers' size, which I think was always going to happen. But for the most part, they did a good job limiting it. There were a few stretches, like the Kings went zone at one point, and the Blazers did a good job of attacking the middle of the zone, getting the ball to DeAndre Ayton. And the Kings tried to swarm, and they, tried to knock the ball away, but they just couldn't quite get it, and Ayton would finish over the defense. And there were other times where the Blazers were getting offensive rebounds. They had 12 in this game. The Kings responded with 9, which isn't too bad because the Kings really haven't been able to get offensive rebounds early. You could see it was a focus, especially for Keegan Murray. Like, he did a really good job. He had 4 offensive rebounds. And I thought he came up with some key ones because there were times where it felt like the Kings couldn't get to the offensive glass. And then Keegan would come out of nowhere and get a big one that would keep the offense going when maybe it was stuck in a little bit of a rut. But on the defensive end, there were definitely times where the Blazers exploited the offensive glass and exploited getting to the middle. And Ayton was knocking down some tough, like, mid-range shots and, just a couple of tough hook shots, which are hard to defend. He's a good offensive player. That's never been the problem with DeAndre Ayton. He's always been able to score the ball. But what the Kings did do well was they were able to guard the three-point line. For the most part, they were able to keep out dribble penetration. And that's definitely big because one thing that we've seen the Kings really struggle with against this Blazers team is when the Blazers do get penetration, a lot of times the guards will miss at the rim or whoever's driving. But then it's the bigs that are always there to clean it up on the other side. And there were definitely times that happened. Like, I thought Len had really good rim protection in this game, but then the Kings couldn't rebound behind him. And so they either got to be able to rebound behind him or they got to keep the guards out of the lane. But for the most part, it was a very good defensive performance, obviously only allowing 98 points. It was nice to see the Kings bench not totally give up the lead in the first half. It wasn't the best minutes when Sabonis was out, but it wasn't as bad as I think we saw in the previous 2 games. Both DeRozan and Fox, I thought, were better in those moments. There was definitely a time in the second quarter where the Kings offense just completely stopped. The ball was being held for far too long. I thought Monk was kind of a problem where he was just not moving the ball and he was leaving his feet when he would drive inside, trying to find passes, and it wasn't working. But then the Kings were able to get some steals, and DeRozan was a big part of that. And to get out and run was huge to be able to kind of maintain the lead. The end of the second quarter was so weird. I don't even know what to think about it. It was just weird officiating, some very weird plays, but the Kings were able to come out on top. I felt like it could have gone either way at the end of that second quarter. The Kings could have been down or they could have been up 8, and it turned out they were up 8, which was nice. But at that point, the Kings still weren't able to pull away, and that had been the problem the previous 2 games. The previous 2 games, the Kings had leads, and then they weren't able to pull away because, they weren't able to either get enough stops or keep the offense going, especially when Sabonis was out. They weren't shooting well from three in the first half. It was pretty much only Kevin Huerter who it was good to see knock down some 3-point shots, just like he did against the Lakers. So we really needed to see something in the third quarter, because it's great to be able to, stay ahead for a half while it's ugly. But then the Kings just really needed to, for once in 3 games, be able to pull away. And that's exactly what they did in the third quarter. The third quarter was a beauty. They scored 38 points. I loved the way that Fox came out in that first quarter offensively. There were some lapses defensively, like DeMar didn't hedge hard enough on the first possession, I think it was. Then Fox made a mistake defensively, so they gave up a couple of baskets. But they corrected that pretty quickly. It was just like 2 individual mistakes. And Fox just attacked Kamara off the dribble. And that is my favorite version of Fox, when he gets going left and he just blows by and he finishes high off the glass with the left. That is my favorite type of De'Aaron Fox. They didn't pull away right away in the third quarter. You had DeAndre Ayton hurting us by just being camped out down low. Feels like at some point he should have been called for a 3-second violation, because I just, every time you looked, he was in the paint. But the Blazers got within 2, and then Fox hit a big 3, and we went to a timeout. When the Blazers got within 2, I was like, here we go again. Kings not being able to pull away. And obviously Fox hitting that 3 eased that a little bit, but it was the way that the Kings came out of that timeout. It was like, finally they pull away. Malik Monk, a huge part of that. Keegan Murray hadn't even scored, and he came out. They posted him up on Anthony Simons, and he hit a nice step back. You had Domas hitting a transition layup over Ayton, and then a Huerter corner 3. And just like that, the Kings were up 12. That was huge. And the great part was, it didn't stop there. Even after, the Blazers called the timeout once we went up 12. But it didn't stop there. Keon made some really key defensive plays. He was in there being disruptive, and so was the whole team. And it was whenever the Blazers would get the ball to the middle of the court, Kings were just right there, swarming at all times. Keon was a part of that. Fox was a part of that. I mean, everyone really was a part of that. And that just helped the Kings get out in transition and be able to score that way, because at times it was definitely a struggle in the half court. So they needed to be able to score in transition. And then Monk just started knocking down from deep, which was really nice to see. And that helped the Kings with that next, I see it as kind of thresholds, where that first threshold was the Kings couldn't get it over 8 points. Then they jump it to 12 points. And then they got past that 12-point threshold. And that's when the game was pretty much over. We saw 1 Alex Len minute to start the second half. And then I think the Kings saw that the Blazers didn't have a center in there, so they went to Lyles at the 5. And I don't necessarily love the way the Kings run offense when they have, this kind of small ball 5-out lineup. I don't think the Kings are the best offensively, but an offensive rebound helped. And then just playing super fast is what really got that lineup to be successful. That lineup, they rely on the 3 ball to be falling. That's the thing. The 3 ball has to be falling. If it's falling for Trey Lyles, that is especially the key, because he's going to get open looks in the pick and pop. DeAndre Ayton came back in. He didn't want to get out to Lyles. And Lyles, I think he only made 1 3. Yeah, he only made 1 3. But that 3-point shooting where Lyles can drag the center away, that is the key to that lineup. The Kings did ease off a little too early, where if they just would have kept going for like 2-3 more minutes, then they would have been able to rest earlier. But it's not that big of a deal. They just had to lock back in and were able to, fight off a fake comeback attempt from the Blazers. I think the Kings have kind of been equally as good at both ends of the court this season, where for the most part it's been really good defense with just like a few lapses. And same thing on the offensive end. This game was really not too much different. They ended up shooting 40% from the 3-point line, which is kind of a surprising number considering how bad the first half was. But they got up more 3-pointers in the second half, and they were knocking them down. And I think they were just kind of able to wear down the Blazers to a point where they could finally open up some space offensively. The Blazers were on the second night of a back-to-back. The Lakers were on the second night of a back-to-back in the last game. I don't know how much that really matters early in the season. I feel like early season, it's more about guys maybe not being ready to play full 48-minute games, not about playing back-to-back nights. It's like the short-term fatigue rather than the long-term fatigue, but not something, I really know. I've never played in the NBA, but the Kings will be on the second night of a back-to-back tomorrow. And if you want to have an excuse a few times a season for just coming out super sluggish on the second night of a back-to-back, you have to win when other teams are on the second night of a back-to-back. Going through some of the individual performances, Domantas Sabonis, classic double-double, 16, 13, 7 assists from him efficiently. 3 turnovers. Honestly, I'll take only 3 turnovers from him because that's what I was worried about coming into this game, was him having space to get into the lane, but having to force things against the length of this Blazers team. And so he did a pretty solid job of not turning the ball over too much. And the Kings, for the most part, limited the turnovers pretty well, even when the offense didn't seem like it was in the flow of things. Like in the first quarter, although the offense didn't look great, they kept the ball moving, and eventually they'd find a shooter, and that's how they got out to a lead. In the second quarter, it started sticking a bit more. So even though the defense from the Blazers was the same, the offense from the Kings, I felt, took a little bit of a hit, at least when that bench was in there, because the ball stopped moving as much. And that's when they had to rely really on DeMar DeRozan to get to the line a bunch, to carry that offense. DeMar in this game was just as advertised, right? This is exactly what we wanted from DeMar. When the Kings offense isn't totally flowing, when Portland's playing some pretty solid defense, we need a guy who can just go get some buckets, who has that length, who can just shoot over tight coverage, who can draw fouls. This was the game that we brought DeRozan in for, right? And he absolutely delivered, carried us through that first half, hit some tough shots, hit one at, was it the end of the second quarter or the end of the third quarter? I don't remember, but hit that, tough shot at the buzzer. But it is still Fox taking the majority of the shots. He's taking 20 field goal attempts, and we've seen him getting the majority of the shots through these first 3 games. And I feel like that's the right shot distribution. Like Domas at 8 shot attempts, that's a little low for him, but at times that's just going to happen with how he plays. Although he did hit another 3, 1 for 2 from 3. It's looking good. But Fox, he has another gear. Like, he hasn't been perfect through these first 3 games. He definitely has another gear offensively that hopefully he can hit soon. But he's been fine, and he hit some big shots in this game at times when we needed him to fend off the Blazers and never let them, come back to tie the game at any point. And I think he's been really good defensively so far this season. Other than when he just kind of checked out late in this game, he definitely was a part of this team checking out in that fourth quarter, so the Blazers started that fake comeback. But who cares? I'm not worried about that. Kevin Huerter had another really good game. I mean, he's contributed well in all 3 games, but obviously especially these last 2 games where he's done it on the offensive end. The first game, he just kind of was out there. He didn't hit his threes, but he was fine. But now these last 2 games, looking confident offensively, knocking down from 3. Also, once he starts knocking down from 3 and he gets that confidence, he's able to go inside the arc more. He did that. He looked comfortable doing it. And when he's able to get inside the arc, that's when his passing opens up a little bit more, and he just adds so much more to this Kings offense. And so far, starting him definitely seems like the right decision from Mike Brown. Mike Brown had some comments before the game about, having 8 guys, an 8-man rotation, and then maybe room for a 9th guy and maybe room for a 10th guy. And so I feel like people were kind of scratching their heads like, does that mean Keon's not going to play? But Keon did play, and he played 14 minutes. Mike Brown was referring to Lyles, obviously Monk, and then Len as the 3 guys. But at times we're not going to play Len. And Mike Brown was talking about how he doesn't want to play the starters 40 minutes. And so, if the starters are playing 40 minutes, I can understand there not being a spot for Keon due to Monk already coming off the bench as a guard, and Monk's going to play a significant amount of minutes, and especially if Herder's playing well, then sure, in an 8-man rotation where you're playing the starters 40 minutes, there might not be room for Keon, but that's not what you want to do for most of the season. So, especially with certain matchups. But, when the guys are playing 35 minutes a game, then Keon slots in for 14 minutes, depending on the matchups. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. And I think that's a good way to go about it. He had a solid game where he came in, hit a three, and was super disruptive defensively, and that led to the Kings' offense getting some easy buckets out in transition. Monk, I already talked about, but he struggled in the first half, wasn't playing off 2 feet, had some bad moments where he's holding onto the ball too long, disrupting the offense, but in the second half he came alive and was able to get the Kings to blow this game completely open, which is something that the Kings have really struggled with at times. So that's a big deal. Lyles, he didn't have a great game. I don't think he's been very good defensively. I mean, 0 rebounds is pretty unacceptable from him. Hasn't been able to knock down his shot too much, only hit that 1-3 in the fourth quarter. But hopefully he can kind of get into the swing of things because he didn't have a preseason. So that's the excuse he has going now. But we're going to need more results from him because he's just too important off this bench. If he's not playing well, all of a sudden this bench looks really bad. But if he plays well, then, I'm feeling okay about this bench. Len came in, had some weird moments offensively. He hasn't had the cleanest start to the season, but then after a few minutes, he picked it up, had some good moments at the rim defensively. He had some just 2 bad fouls on the perimeter that then let Portland get into the penalty really early. That's something we just didn't need. He's trying to be disruptive, but picking up those 2 fouls away from the basket were bad. But he made up for it with his rim protection. So we need those we need Lyles, we need Len to be better because they're the only real playable size that we have off the bench. Obviously, Orlando Robinson is injured. At times, you could kind of see the Kings' lack of wing depth when, Jeremy Grant would score, although we limited him pretty well in this game, which I was very happy with. But there were still those times. So, it's not the perfect bench by any means, but we just need them to be able to hold up and hopefully just be able, have Fox and DeMar be able to carry the offense with the bench enough where we can survive those non-Sabonis minutes. And we did an okay job of that in this one. McLaughlin did come in for like 2 minutes, just like he came in for 3 minutes in the last one. Mike Brown before the game said that he went with McLaughlin in the Lakers game instead of Keon for the pace, being able to push the pace. And he also talked about how he kept like pulling him back from the scores table and not subbing him in. So that's why McLaughlin didn't play a lot. But, we just haven't seen a lot from him. And so there wasn't much to go off of. I mean, he needs more minutes to be able to find a way to make an impact. It was nice to get some garbage time, to get Doug McDermott in the game so he could come in, knock down 2 threes. Overall, just a really good win. One the Kings needed to get, and one they got. And I talked about it at the last game. This upcoming stretch is important because this is an easy stretch of schedule. And so far, 1 win out of 1 game. If they could get 4 or 5 wins out of this stretch, I'd be really happy. Their next game is tomorrow, a back-to-back in Utah. Just like the Trailblazers. Like Utah, they have some really good players, but they're just a team that the Kings should absolutely beat. Obviously they have Markkanen. I love Keontae George. He can absolutely light it up at times. They got some scores. They got some good players. Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sexton. John Collins was good against us in preseason. But obviously they, lack the depth. Taylor Hendricks just went down, which is unfortunate. Apparently it looked bad, so I don't even want to watch it. But I think that this is a team that the Kings can exploit on the offensive glass, especially when they're not playing Walker Kessler. When Walker Kessler's in there, maybe it's a little tougher, but the Kings emphasized offensive rebounding in the preseason. And we haven't really seen it, especially in the first two games, a little better against Portland. But I would love to see this be an offensive rebounding game. I don't think you really have the back-to-back excuse. I mean, Utah is going to be on a back-to-back as well. But early in the season, I just don't think that's really an excuse. I think this is another game where Keon Ellis will get minutes. Mike Brown said it's situational when he gets minutes. I think this is a game where he'll play as well. And it's only against those really big teams where you really want to emphasize staying big, and you're going to play the Stars a lot of minutes when he isn't going to play probably. But anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you got this far into the video. As always, shout out to No Rain and Joe Mama for supporting the channel and being members. And I will see you guys tomorrow after the Kings play the Utah Jazz. Peace.